Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Krembil coffee break session about the art of the media interview. And it's my pleasure to be here and talk to you about this today because I think that a lot of times getting a media request can be super daunting, and it doesn't have to be if you just learn a few tips and tricks to help guide you in preparing and in doing the interview and hopefully enjoying it a lot more. So let's begin. I just wanted to start off, since we have broadened our audience quite a bit since we began these Krembil coffee break sessions, that I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about my background to let you know how I come to know a thing or two about the art of the media interview. I spent 20 years as a television journalist at various broadcasters here in Toronto, including Discovery Canada's Daily Planet, a science show. And Daily Planet was on the air for 23 years. And while I was there, I wrote and produced short documentaries about scientists and inventors and a few one-hour specials as well. And in the course of doing that, ended up doing hundreds, if not thousands, of media interviews between that and my time in news. So I've done lots of interviews. I've learned a lot of things, and I wanted to, and since I come from the opposite perspective from coming from the media, I thought it would be helpful to share what I've learned with all of you today. So let's talk about media. We have traditional media, which is television, broadcast, and radio and print, and very much still a big part of the media requests that we do get at UHN. And as well, we have other platforms like websites, blogs, social media, and even podcasts, especially now, which have opened up many more opportunities for our UHN scientists and clinicians to do interviews about their work. You can see here on the left various logos of media organizations that we have dealt with and we have received requests from. And so just to give you an idea of sort of the breadth of what we deal with in public affairs, we're very fortunate to be able to do a lot of media every year because of the amazing and vast amounts of work that we do in research and clinical at UHN. So we'll talk a little bit about the types of media requests that come in. There's one called a meet and greet, very uncommon these days as nobody's got time for them, but in the olden days, as my kids would say. And also once in a while, if you get, for example, a new health reporter on the scene who may want to familiarize himself or herself with some of the key players in some of the disease areas. So you may get a call from somebody saying, you know what, I am new to the Toronto Star and I've just started working the health beat and I wanted to introduce myself and find out a little bit more about your work in the hopes that, I may be able to call on you for a story that I'm working on in future. So that's always a great telephone call to get because obviously you're on their radar. Informational or background interviews are when a reporter or writer may get in touch with you to ask you background about a specific topic or disease area. Now, the downside is that you won't generally get attribution or a quote in a story for this because they're looking for background information to help them with a story. But the flip side or the upside is that you're developing a relationship with them and that next time they are looking for a quote or to give attribution in a story, they may come calling. So, these are all optional, but these are opportunities for you to build a relationship and get to know some of the reporters. A live interview, oftentimes you'll get these requests when there's a topical news story about epilepsy or concussion or stroke, and that's your area of expertise. And you often don't have a lot of notice for live interviews. It's usually, a chase producer from one of the around-the-clock news channels calling for a very quick comment. And or a live interview could also be, the next morning on a national morning show or coming up as well. So there's different opportunities for live. Pre-taped is, when a reporter will come and do an interview with you as part of a larger story about a topic. So you may have someone come and ask you for a quote on camera in the afternoon, and then the story is generally on that night. There's other opportunities for pre-taped where, things may not air or be broadcast for some time. And especially when it comes to a podcast, they may tape you or record you rather, and then it may not air for weeks or even months. Email questions is our favorite because it's the easiest. You can do it on your own time and there's a paper trail for what you've said. So this often happens with international outlets. Once we have put out a press release on a topic, they will email 4 or 5 questions and ask you to answer them. What we often do to preempt these situations is put together a Q&A so that we can send that to them when they make that request in the hopes that that answers all of their questions and it won't take any more time on your part. Really excited to talk to you about these common misconceptions and, and tell you why I don't think that they're good. These are things that I hear quite often in my role at Krembil, and as someone who spent many years in the media, I really think there's some things that need to get clarified. So, common misconceptions. The media always get it wrong. Reporters are biased. Media always has an angle. And why bother? They'll just write or broadcast what they want to anyway. And I say no. Journalists want to get it right. And you have to help them do that, because imagine that, especially journalists who are on a general assignment beat as opposed to a health or a science beat, they need some help from you. They need the information, they need the key points, but they don't need all that extra added information that makes it a bit muddier to understand what the true story is. So go into each media request understanding or believing that journalists want to get it right. They are not out to get you. They need your help to do that. And what we're going to talk about today is the best way to do that, to help them get it right. So starting with the life cycle of an interview, we start with the ask, the media request when it comes in. Then we move to the preparation. And that can be kind of time consuming, but necessary if you're going to move forward with the interview. Then we've got the interview itself, followed by the follow-up, and finally the story when it appears on television, on the radio, or in print. So let's go back and talk about the ask. Let's assume that you've just gotten a media request and you're not sure what to do about it. Well, first of all, the majority of media requests really should be coming to you through public affairs. Many people that we work with in the media, they know to come to us first because we can help facilitate those requests, and also just keep an eye and make sure that everybody's got everything that they need. If there's a patient involved, we've consented them. If they want to come on site, we will be there to supervise. So hopefully you're getting the request through public affairs because the media has come through us. If they have not, the best thing to do is to contact public affairs. Now, if you don't know who the public affairs representative is at your site or who is responsible for your program, then the best thing to do, as you can see on the right, is to go to the corporate intranet and click on Public Affairs Toolkit in the top left. When you do, you'll be brought to a page called Public Affairs Resources. And then under About Public Affairs, there's Meet the Team. So scroll through and you will see who is the best person to speak to, who is affiliated with your institute or your program. Once you do that, Public Affairs can help you decide whether or not to accept the request, because not all media requests are created equal, and not all of them are requests that you should do. We can help you, if you are going to do the interview, develop and craft key messages. Very important. And we can help provide basic media training and maybe a little bit of rehearsal time to get you comfortable. Should you do the media interview? There are many pros and cons. First of all, the pro, will it increase public awareness about your work? That's ultimately your goal and what you want to get out of this. Could that public awareness potentially lead to future funding opportunities? Very difficult to measure, but you can assume that if you're going on, national morning television and they have many people watching them, then one of them could be a potential new donor. So you're widening your berth of the amount of people who know about what you do. And will it boost your confidence level in speaking with the media in future? You should not use a media interview as practice alone. That should not be the only reason for you doing an interview. But if you decide that it meets the criteria and you want to do it, then what will come as a result is a boost in your confidence in dealing with media in general. On the con side, it does take time, and time is precious and we don't have a lot of time. So it does take time to prepare and to do research, and also to do a run through or several of the interview before it actually happens, potentially with somebody from public affairs. You really have to consider when you get a media request, could it compromise you or the organization? Is it out of your range of expertise? And will it be a panel format? Any of these things might want to make you think twice, especially the first two. The panel format I put in there because that can be tricky. A panel can be a really lively and engaging discussion, but depending who else is on the panel and depending what is the goal of the discussion, that's something you may want to consider opting out of, depending again on your level of comfort. The prep. So first of all, who is asking you for this interview? Is it a 5-minute live TV interview request, or is it a request for a 30-minute conversation on a podcast? Number one, that will determine how you prepare for this interview. Because if it's super short versus a little bit lengthier, you're going to have to be really directed and succinct with your answers. Research the reporter who's going to be interviewing you. Get a sense of their style and the types of topics that they cover, and also make sure to scan their latest social media posts and read a few or watch a few of their past stories. You just, you want to get a sense of who they are and how they cover stories, and it's just going to help and make you feel more comfortable when the actual interview comes around. It's important to ask questions before you decide 100% whether you're going to do this interview. So these are completely legitimate and valid questions to be able to ask a reporter. What is the story about? Are you looking for a quote, a statement, or an interview? Who else have you spoken with? What documents do you have or need? And when will the story run and how long will it be? So once you have this information, you can make a valid decision as to whether or not this is worth your time to do the interview. So you've decided to go ahead with it, and now there's no way out. You've accepted, you've done the preparation, and now it's game time. So I love this quote from Katharine Hepburn, famous actress and activist, because here's somebody famous who's a celebrity and she's used to having a lot of attention, and even she hates interviews. I think a lot of people just, the thought of putting yourself out like that, putting yourself out there is just so worrisome. And so, most often they'll just say no and shy away from it. So her quote, "Death will be a great relief. No more interviews." Just heading to some tips now, because now you've decided to do the interview. And here are a few tips to help you on the day of. Number one, simplify the science. So try to leave the scientific jargon at home, and depending again on your audience or depending on which platform you are doing this interview for, just imagine that you're speaking to your next door neighbor or your barber or somebody who doesn't have a scientific background but who assume might be interested in your work. And try to bring it down to a level that the most amount of people can understand what you do and why it's important. Consider your location. This is not always easy to do in the hospital setting because we don't often have a choice of where we do interviews. It may just be, a room that's open. Oftentimes interviews are done in people's offices. So if there's a possibility of somebody doing an interview in your office, then please clean up your office. If you're like my kids, you'll ignore that and you won't, but clean it up. Make sure that at least the spot where you're going to be interviewed in is, looks relatively professional. Make sure that there's no patient identifying information anywhere. So if you've got it, up on a bulletin board or, somewhere where you're working on something, you've got to remove that. And just make sure that it's a professional environment. You can see in the top right-hand corner in this photo that sometimes it's nice to do interviews outside, but consider the background that's behind you because it can project an image. Here it looks very powerful that this person's a politician and they're in front of this building, this institution. So think about your location as much as possible, as much leeway as you have, and consider that. Use analogies and examples as much as possible, and this is part of your preparation. So when you think about your topic, try to think of something that makes sense as something that you can explain to be able to connect with people and provoke some emotion with an analogy or an example. Mind your tone. It's very easy to be to find something off-putting during the interview. Maybe you don't like a question that you've been asked, and for the rest of the interview, you appear irritated and frustrated. So try to let things roll off your back during the interview itself. Let it go. Mind your tone. Be professional and courteous and positive, and take it from there. Body language is key. You can see in the bottom right, we've got two people here, one with their arms crossed, with sort of a grimace on their face, and the other one is standing tall. Her body language is open, she's smiling, and most importantly, she's maintaining eye contact, which is really important in an interview. You want to maintain that eye contact and make sure that they know that you're listening. I've learned along the way that these value add comments in an interview can actually draw somebody's attention to you, and it can really make them listen to what you have to say. So here's some examples. If there's one thing your listeners should know, it's this. The main takeaway here is maybe, but it's important to understand that, or the real issue here is. So when you say these things in an interview, immediately if I'm listening or if I'm distracted and doing something else with the television on in the background, I'm tuning in. because you've just told me that what you're about to tell me is really important. Little tip and trick. The fact is, you have to think about, what is your key message? What do you want people to most remember? They're not going to remember everything that you're talking about during the interview. So what are the 1 or 2 things that you want them to go away with? Make sure they do remember them, and try to use one of these comments to help you do that. We are living in the age of COVID, and the majority of media interviews have been done remotely. So this is a whole new way of thinking when it comes to the media interview. So a few tips on how to ace a virtual media interview. Try to find a quiet place. I say try because I have young kids, and it's virtually impossible to guarantee that they aren't going to break in any moment. But try as much as possible for your own peace of mind to find a quiet place where you can't hear construction or kids across the street. And it's just going to be helpful overall for the interviewer, and also for you to keep your focus. Put all your technology on Do Not Disturb. Aim for consistent lighting. The longer the interview is, the more likely, if you're by a window and you're using natural light as the main lighting that you're using for the interview, that you're going to start off lit beautifully, and then halfway through the interview, a big shadow is going to come over your face. So as much as possible, try to aim for consistent lighting. Don't depend 100% on natural lighting from outside. Dress the set and the part. So if you're, especially since a lot of us are working from home, in the background, if you feel like it's kind of sparse, you may want to put another lamp to light it up. You may want to put a plant. If there's not much in the background, you may want to dress the bookshelf a little bit and make it, we've done shoots where we've started with an empty bookcase and we've gone around offices gathering books and vases and things like that, just to make it look a little bit homier. Don't go to too much trouble, but if you can put a few things in to make the background look nice, then do it. And dress the part. You may be sitting at home doing the interview, but you should look as if you were going to the studio. So try to look professional, and don't wear pajamas. And lastly, test your video and sound prior to the interview. And this can make or break an interview, because we have had situations in which we log on, we can't make it work, and unfortunately we can't do the interview. So just do this for your peace of mind again. Okay, you've done the interview, you've gotten through it. Congratulations. And now you're in the follow-up mode. Now, if it's a same day interview where they come and talk to you in the afternoon and the story airs that night, there's going to be less chance for a follow-up. But virtually any other scenario, think about it. Do you need to clarify anything that you want to send the reporter an email and say, actually, I just want to give you a bit more context about that? Are there any supplementary resources or any information that might be helpful for background? Pro tip, don't send them 4 or 5 research papers that you've worked on in the last 10 years. Too much information. Unless they're a health or science reporter, they're not going to be able to go through all of that dense information. But if you can send them a Q&A that you might have, if you can send them the one paper that the story is based on, or any other media stories that have been done about it, then it just helps them with context. Does the reporter require a headshot or a bio link? Usually they do. So make that something that you can follow up with to make sure that they have. Have you clarified which title you'd like the reporter to use? This is tricky because many of you have many titles and you can't use them all, especially on television. There just isn't the space. So consider how to handle that. Maybe you're going to use Krembil Research Institute under your name, but in the introduction, you're also going to ask that they use your U of T affiliation or something like that. So there's different ways around it. They don't always work, but you should certainly try to clarify that if you can, so that everybody's happy with the titles that you're able to include. Finally, the story appears. You've done all that work, and now you can just revel in the excitement of your story airing or being broadcast or coming out in the Globe and Mail. You can see here a few photos of some of the media interactions that our Krembil folks have had. It's so exciting. I always love to take behind the scenes pictures because it's fun for them to see what it was like during the experience, and it's also a great reminder to us of just the how it feels to be able to put the research that we do at Krembil out there into the world and get that media interest always coming back to us. So once you have the story, depending on if it's a broadcast story and you've got a link, or it's a print story or a web link, you can repurpose that. You can use that for social media. You can put it on your website. So there's all these different ways to have it live on. And I would recommend that, especially if it's a broadcast interview, try to download it as soon as possible because their links do not last very long. So, quick update on media interview do's and don'ts. Always do be professional, pleasant, and positive. Let things roll off your back. Don't let things fester during an interview. Speak in plain language. Try to leave the scientific jargon and appeal to the widest possible audience. Do repeat the question in your answer. So, can you tell me a little bit more about your study? Well, yes, in my study, we found that da 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 da. Or how many people, how many people have participated in this clinical trial? In this clinical trial, we've had approximately 300 participants so far. Da 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 da. So, anytime that you repeat the question in your answer, it gives the reporter a complete soundbite to work with, and there's less chance they're going to have to edit it. Use analogies and even personal anecdotes when appropriate. Not everybody is comfortable with this, but if you got into Parkinson's research because your grandfather lived with Parkinson's and you saw it firsthand when you were growing up and you wanted to do something to help, that's a really compelling story that would provoke some emotion from your audience. If you're comfortable sharing that, then you should. Clarify any mistakes or statements made in error. This can be tricky if it's a interview that's already aired, but you should always try to clarify any mistakes, even just to get it out there and to ask that maybe a link is not put up on their website or something like that. Be reasonable, because if it's not an actual mistake, but you don't like the way that you sounded or something like that, that's not really a reasonable request in hindsight. But if there's an actual mistake or something said in error or something taken out of context, then oftentimes the media outlet will agree to take it down. Media interview don'ts. Don't lie or speculate if you don't know the answer. It's okay to say you don't know the answer. You could say, you know what, I'm not 100% sure, but let me check into that and get back to you. So definitely don't lie or speculate if you don't know the answer to what they're asking. Don't overshare with too many details. This is something that happens like 90% of the time, especially if you're not used to media, because you're not really sure when you're supposed to stop talking. But oversharing is not helpful. And so that's why it's best to practice in advance. It's best to come up with your key messages and stick to them. Another tip and trick for reporters is that when people tend to ramble and overshare a lot, they will often say, after a very long answer, they'll say, so in a nutshell, da-da-da-da-da. And the majority of the time, the in a nutshell is what will go into the media story. So a lot of reporters just wait until the very end, until the in a nutshell, and then that's what they take. Don't speak off the record. Don't assume that anything you say to the reporter or anything you say with a microphone on will not be used. It is not that they are out to get you and out to trap you. It's not that at all. It's that it's hard to remember when you're a reporter working on 1 to 3 stories a day, depending on your outlet. You're not going to remember whether somebody said off the record when they get back to the newsroom. So keep it easy for yourself. From the minute you walk into the room with the reporter until the minute that you leave, assume that everything that you say can and will be used, not necessarily against you, but it can and will be used in the story. So just keep it easy and just keep the conversation light. Just make sure you don't get too friendly that you let your guard down, which brings us to the next tip. Don't lose your cool and don't let your guard down. Losing your cool is, getting provoked by a question that you don't like or that you're not comfortable with. And you got to let that just roll off for the duration of the interview. And it's something that you can address after the fact. And don't let your guard down. So again, don't let a friendly interaction with the reporter or the writer, don't let that affect the goal of the interview, which is to get your research out and promote it. And just be careful what you're saying. Anytime you're in a room, anytime you've got a microphone on, especially. And don't comment on what others have said, particularly if you're not familiar with their position. So, if you come into an interview and they say, this morning, Premier Doug Ford had a press conference where he announced this, what do you think? And most often, if you've seen it or you've heard about it, but maybe you haven't. And you really shouldn't comment on it unless you're familiar with it and unless you're comfortable from an institutional perspective of what our position is, you shouldn't comment on it. So to recap, when doing a media interview, be clear and concise, speak in plain language, use analogies and examples, definitely clarify any errors, and most importantly, be confident. And I'm going to add a sixth one, have fun. Because getting comfortable with media, it's really fun. You know, it's fun to be able to speak with people and talk about what you love to do. And so the scariness of doing an interview should not stop you from having those experiences. So I say, get yourself out there with a little bit of tips and tricks and training, and you know, enjoy educating and engaging with more people. So I will finish with this quote from Chris Hadfield, astronaut extraordinaire, Commander Chris Hadfield, where he says, "To me, science is just formalized curiosity." So again, you are all subject matter experts. You are all subject matter experts, and you have a lot to share. You have a lot of knowledge and a lot of information and a lot of passion about what you do. And why should that be stuck in a lab or stuck in you know, a clinical situation when you can share it with more people and have them know what you do and understand what you do, and who knows what that could lead to. So just before we go to questions, or assuming that you have some questions, or maybe you need some time to formulate them, I thought it would be fun to do a little role play interview. So I hope you guys are game for this right now. Do we have Dr. Michael Reber with us today?
He's there.
There he is. Okay, so we're going to take just a couple of minutes. I want to thank Dr. Reber for being my guinea pig. And let's assume that Dr. Reber has just had a request from CTV Your Morning to do an interview about his work with virtual reality in low vision patients and his research. So if you all bear with us, we're going to do a short mock interview to kind of talk a little bit about, to take some of the tips that you've just heard and some of the tips that you've picked up from past sessions, and give you an idea of how something like this might go. You ready?
Okay, let's go.
Dr. Michael Reber, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
So tell me a little bit about the work that you're doing with virtual reality and how that might help patients with low vision.
So we are developing new and innovative technology at the Krembil Research Institute. And we decided to do this because we find out that, for example, every 12 minutes, one Canadian is diagnosed with vision impairment, and 70% of them, for Canadians, the loss of vision is the most feared disability, which is an amazing number. So this means that people having, patients having vision impairment and vision problem nowadays are strongly suffering from it. So we decided to go for it and develop technologies to trying to help and restore some sort of visual perception in those patients.
So tell me, what types of patients could be helped by this technology, and how does it work?
So we believe that all patients with low vision can be potentially good targets, I would say, for this technology. We are developing specific visual rehabilitation programs for specific diseases such as age-related macular degeneration or glaucoma or diabetic retinopathy. And the technology is based on virtual reality. So it's a very high-tech approach, but we believe it's very, very promising.
And so can you tell me a little bit about where your research is at currently? Are you doing studies with patients?
So currently, we are indeed performing some case studies. We are still waiting for the final agreement to enroll more patients on particularly an age-related macular degeneration study, pilot study, that we hope we can soon start at Krembil, and another study in collaboration with doctors at Sick Kids, where we would like to perform some visual rehabilitation in children with homonymous myopia.
Amazing. Can you just tell me before we go, how much success are you seeing using this protocol?
It's very encouraging, very promising, and I must say even more so surprising, because the progress made are unbelievable, I would say. And in a previous interview, we had a patient that told us about his experience using this technology, and it's a life-changing. So for this particular patient, it was a life-changing. So it's really amazing how significant improvement can be done using this technology with only, I would say, a couple of months of visual rehabilitation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Reber.
Thank you very much.
For more information about Dr. Reber's work, you can find him on Twitter at @ReberLab.
Thank you very much.
Oh, that was fun.
Okay.
Now, we didn't prepare for that at all, because I didn't want you to know which questions were coming your way, because I wanted to see, you know, especially how you would react in that situation. And just a morning show interview is different from any other interview that you're ever going to have. Because a morning show, think about when you're watching television in the morning, you want to be entertained. It's all about news you can use, and it's about connection. And so I think you really did a great job.
Thank you.
What I remember the most from your interview is, this is life-changing. For this patient, this was life-changing. So you told me, and you can see that the interviews will always skew towards, what have you found? How does it work? And how will it help patients? Always, always, always.
See, I worked on the background, eh?
I saw. Very impressed. Thank you.
Well, I have a couple of questions, though.
Sure.
So I started to write it down, but maybe I can just like ask direct live like this. So I had experience few interaction with journalists, and they often contact you and ask you a question about like a hot topic or something, or want your opinion or a comment on something hot topic. And you may want to take some time to think about it. You know, you don't want to come up with a response, especially if it's something that comes out in the news, or, you know, like something hot. You want to be careful, and you want to think about your answer. And very often they're really pushing you to get the answer right here, right now. So it's a bit difficult to deal with, because you're telling them, no, look, I mean, ask your question. I'll think about it, and then I'll get back to you. But very often this is not enough, and they don't like it so much. So I don't know if you have any particular recommendation or advice.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because you're right, that does happen. That's number one, the reason to loop public affairs in, because we can help, you know, be the go-between often between media. The truth is that you are not under no obligation to do an interview, and they're pushing you. And I've been on that side. So I've worked in many different areas within the broadcast television industry, and I've been a chase producer for News Channel. So imagine that in one day, you need to line up 7 or 8 interviews, and you're just going all the time. So I feel for them, but at the same time, it's not, the obligation is not on you to do it if you don't feel comfortable, or if you feel like you need more time. So never feel pressured by a reporter, because it's your choice, not theirs. And you're never gonna, I don't think you're gonna lose an opportunity, because again, they are on a hamster wheel of content trying to get it out all the time. So, you know, you may hear from them 2 days later about something completely different, and they have no memory of, of you turning them down. So they've got a roster that, you know, they'll constantly go through, and that's kind of how it works. So I would say, you know, the more interviews you do, the more comfortable you'll get. If they're calling about something topical and you're not going to get back to them right away, they're going to find somebody else. And maybe they should find somebody else if it's something that you're not comfortable speaking on. But again, public affairs can help you determine what to do. And if you decide, you know what, I'm going to do it, I've got an hour's notice, I've got some time, then ideally, if public affairs has the time and can work that quickly, you know, we'll quickly craft some key messages that you stick to.
Well, this is something maybe we should be aware of as scientists, that indeed they have a very short memory, I would say. I also faced that issue once when they were asking me for something, and then I said, well, I need some time. And then a few days later, they contacted me for something totally different. and actually, it was the same person. So for me, it was still the same topic. So
Right.
I didn't get it right away, you know, and I was like, well, wait, I just told you I couldn't answer right away, and so on and so on. So the way the media are functioning is also something we as scientists should be aware of, because it's true that it's sometimes destabilizing a little bit when they contact you and then you say no, and 48 hours later they contact you again, and you're like, what? You know, so we need to learn how the media world also works, actually.
Yep, I think that there's, you know, it really depends on who's contacting you. If it's a chase producer from one of the sort of 24-hour news channels, then they're going like this all the time. If it's a producer for The Current at CBC, you know, or Quirks and Quarks, they've got a little bit more time to, you know, their segments are a little bit more in depth. So sometimes you'll get contacted about a very surface level interview, like we need somebody in an hour to talk about this. And then, you know, the ones that you really want are the ones where you have a little bit of time to think about it. I will say that sometimes the more time you have to think about it isn't so good either, because then you're constantly doubting yourself and you're constantly wondering what you should say. So sometimes, you know, having that deadline of in a couple of hours is not a bad thing, as long as it's a topic that you're very comfortable with.
Okay. All right.
Thanks, Michael.
Well,
thank you, and great job. So thank you very much, Heather, for another wonderful session. The discussion around, you know, understanding how media works also is very fascinating. It's very interesting. I don't think I would have thought, you know, that, you know, they are forgetful only because they're constantly on the go looking for more material. So that's good to know. While everybody is formulating their thoughts for the chat box, I have a question myself. Heather, you talked in one of your slides about the follow-up and, you know, what we should do in a follow-up. Now, what happens if sometimes the, you know, at the end of the interview, some of the information that I provided was maybe misinterpreted or it didn't come out the right way, and I feel very unhappy about it? What is the right approach to this? How do I follow up?
Great point. It really depends on the, you know, if you've just done a live hit on news channel and you feel like you spoke out of turn, you can certainly contact the producer and tell them that. And, you know, maybe that will affect whether or not they post the interview afterwards. But there's nothing you can do about a live interview that's just happened, other than not do it again next time. If you have sent in some answers to email questions and you think to yourself, oh, you know what, I completely forgot to mention this, or I mentioned this, but actually you know, that's something that's something that I shouldn't have said yet. It's not published yet or something like that. You know, you can certainly reach back out to them. This is the other point that I actually wanted to make, is that, and I should have made it earlier when I put up that common misconceptions page. I've worked as a journalist for years. I have yet to meet a journalist who is out to get someone, or who has an axe to grind, or, you know, an angle. The journalists that I know and have worked with, and granted they're mostly Canadian, but these are people that want to get the story right. They want to tell a great story, and they have very little time to do it. So it's literally just about finding the techniques to help them by giving them the information that they need. But this misconception, it actually really bothers me when I hear people say, I don't do media. They always get it wrong. Well, I think, well, who is that helping? Because now you're not doing media when you could be sharing your amazing work on, you know, Parkinson's. But also it's just, it's not right. It's not, the perception is incorrect. So I think you should think of things that way. When you think of the media, don't think that they're out to get you. Don't think that they want to get the story wrong. They don't. So take the tips and tricks that you've sort of learned today and, you know, try to do it a little bit differently next time. But in terms of the follow-up, there's no problem with following up anywhere, anytime, even if something has already happened, but it is out of your control. You can't control whether, you know, what they do at that point, other than making your point and making your ask. If your ask is that, please don't post that story, I realized after the fact. Now I'll make one more point that I think is very relevant, is, you know, scientists especially do not work in silos. You've got a team, and there may be 10 people on that team or on that paper that you've just put out. And you may want to give each of them, you know, this promotion. But you have to think about the big picture, because you can't insist to a reporter that every single member of your lab is listed in the story, or that, you know, they have to mention these 3 people, because it won't happen. That's not what happens in media stories. That's what happens in, you know, UHN news stories or foundation articles and things like that. We have that kind of control to be able to include everyone that you want to be included. So don't get stuck on things like that. Those are some of the things that we talked about that can be frustrating and irritating when you're dealing with journalists. Like, no, I want to include all of my co-collaborators in this story, or I'm not doing it. Well, it's not going to work. They're not going to, you know, especially in a web story or in a television interview, they're not going to keep that in when you do it. So have that in mind and understand that they are, you know, they're working on a story that's not, it's not supposed to be promotion. It's supposed to be a story that is accessible on the news for people watching. So, you know, when we take it, maybe we'll put it up in the tweet and include everybody. So there's ways that we can take the finished story, as we talked about, repurposing it and using that. But that comes up a lot where people say, well, you know, that's not okay. They need to include these 4 people in the story, or I'm not doing it. And I say, well, they're not going to. So now you're going to miss an opportunity to talk about your paper, and that's just not going to work.
It's a really good point. So I see Karen has now typed in a comment. Now Karen has indicated that she's noticed that some interviews on TV include some footage from when the interview was being set up. Perhaps this gives a more human view of the person being interviewed, but I wonder if the person being interviewed realized that the pre-interview time was being captured and potentially used. I had an experience in my first CTV interview more than 20 years ago when I said something before the formal interview started, and that ended up being used as the sound bit. I was quite upset about this. So is it typically you know, known to the interviewee, or do they typically ask for permission to use that kind of pre-interview segment, Heather?
No, and that is exactly what I mean when I say never let your guard down and never assume anything is off the record. I see it all the time, and I saw it as a journalist a lot too, is that, you know, people, they have this sense that as the microphone's being put on and as it's being taken off, you know, it gets very friendly with media and reporters, and it should, because you've got relationships with these people, and especially with health reporters, you see them over and over again. They're not trying to get you, but if you say something and you're wearing a microphone and they can use it and it makes sense to the story, they're going to do it. So there's no clear, okay, now we're on and now we're off. As long as there's a microphone on in the room, you know, they can use it. Now you could say to them, you could have made a joke and thought, oh, I shouldn't have said that. You know, I shouldn't have been so sort of off the cuff. And you can say to them, you know what, don't use that. I'm not comfortable with that. No guarantee they're not going to. Most likely they will. I mean, I don't know anyone who would purposely use something that had, you know, they've been told, please don't use that. But just to put yourself in the best possible situation, just don't. Just assume from the minute you're in the room with a reporter that whatever you say is something that they can use for their story.
Okay, that's good to know. Never let your guard down. So Michael has a follow-up on Karen's comment. One day he had a phone interview that was supposed to be used for a written communication. It ended up being recorded and made available. He was quite upset and asked the radio channel to remove the interview from their website.
Yeah, so again, this all goes to the preparation, and those questions that I put up that you should ask the journalist, add that to it. You know, so are you recording this conversation today? Are you going to be recording it for audio? Are you recording it for your background? When it comes to international media, you never know. Sometimes they may say, no, I'm just recording it for background, and they could potentially use it. So I say, always play it safe. Assume that anything you're saying in a conversation is on the record, because it gets very murky. And as you can see from Michael's and Karen's comments, it's very disconcerting when something appears that you did not want to appear. And it just feels bad. And it kind of sets up this relationship potentially with that journalist. And I don't think that it's always warranted or it's what they meant. I think there's honestly confusion a lot of times. They just assume that if you're talking, that you're okay with them using it. And also they have an hour to put together the story, so they don't have that much time to think about it. And on your side, you're upset because they've used something that you didn't know was going to be used. So as much as possible, clarify on the front end what the criteria is. What are they looking for? How are they going to do it? What kind of tech, are they going to be recording it for themselves or not? And just get as much information beforehand. And if you're, do it in an email so that you have it. It's not like you can, if there's a misunderstanding, at least you've got an email about it. Doesn't mean that anything is necessarily going to happen. It's just that, you can approach them and say, look, you said you were not going to be using it for audio, and then you went ahead and used it, and most likely they're going to pull it. So again, 100%, don't let your guard down. Don't be talking about things you don't want to share when you have a microphone on. Even journalists have learned that the hard way.
Okay. So Karen has a follow-up. If the interviewer is chit-chatting with you to get you comfortable, is it rude to just not engage?
You know what? Is it rude? I think no. I mean, if you're comfortable doing that, but there's really no problem with the chit chat. You're always going to have the chit chat because these are people, they're not robots, and they do want to develop a relationship with you. And so, and 99% of the time, the chit chat is really innocent. So they're just making conversation. So I would say, you can keep it to a minimum, or just really keep your guard up in terms of what you're saying. And, or make it really clear and just say, okay, this is, I'm just chatting with you right now. And this is not something that I want to share as part of the story. You can do that. I just think it makes it so much easier if you assume that anything you're saying, can and will potentially be something that they might use as part of the story. But I don't, Karen, I'm not, it kind of, then you're setting the tone if you're sort of sitting there quietly and not answering their questions and that kind of thing. I mean, you want to be friendly and you want to develop relationships with these people, especially you, Karen, because your research is so shareable. We've gotten so many media requests about the type of work that you're doing. And you do great interviews. So you also don't want to, make it so that it's just an uncomfortable experience all around.
So what happens if within the chit chat, they start talking about personal stuff or family, and those are things that you're not comfortable with sharing with the broader audience. So for example, on TV as part of an interview, then how do you handle that? And as a follow-up, I'm going to add in another question from Heidi. So it sounds like one needs to highlight boundaries with the interviewer. So how do you highlight those boundaries without coming off as rude or setting that really tense tone even before the interview has started?
It's a really good point. How do you do it? If you're not comfortable, first of all, I think the best hack I can give you is to go on your phone and check your email and just say, oh, I need a second. I just got to finish up some things before we get started. That's probably the easiest thing to do. And then you're just, showing them that you've got to go through your email and just, you're not being rude because you've got to answer these emails before the interview starts. Lots of people do that. If they're going to start talking, I think I'd be shocked if a lot of reporters come in and start asking about family and things like that, unless it's someone that you know. But to Karen's point, there are plenty of inappropriate conversations that I've kind of heard over the years where I'm like, why in the world would you bring that up? So bring your phone, set it to silent before the interview, but just tell them that you have to answer some emails or you've got to finish up some quick work. You can also just, in determining the logistics with public affairs, tell us that you want to come at the last kind of minute. You don't really want to be standing around. And the other thing too is you don't have to be sitting in that chair for minutes and minutes on end. You can be out in the hall on your phone and then, ask them to call you in as soon as they need you. And then it's just putting the microphone on you and getting started. So there are ways to minimize the contact so you're not sitting there for 20 minutes awkwardly. And but I think try those to start. And yeah.
Okay, so I think that's all of the questions for the session for Heather today. I see Twain has now popped online, and he's got, is that his candy jar, his flower pot?
No, it's a light cover that I use. Yeah, so I don't have an accessible jar nearby, so toss all the names in here, and let's pick out a name here. And let's see.
I'm laughing. I just got a media request.
Oh, Karen Davis.
What?
Look at that. You have won a Krembil mug. Wonderful.
Karen, I'm so happy for you.
Finally. I thought
I don't know. I think Michael should get one too for being my guinea pig.
statistically, it was bound to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for tuning in with us every
I
Friday.
guess I have to come into work sometime to actually get it.
Right.
We will set it aside and you can grab it from Manoj. No worry.
Thanks very
We'll have
much.
your name
Thanks.
on it. And Heather, sorry, what were you just saying?
I was saying I think Michael should get one for being my guinea pig.
I think so too.
Thank you. Finally.
There's items.
Yeah, so no worries. We have one more session, and if you've been tuning in with us and you've been longing for a Krembil mug, limited edition Krembil mug, you've got one more chance next week. Heather.
Yes, so next week, Twain is going to be talking about design hacks for your scientific presentation. I'm sure he's going to get a lot of you tuning in for that. So just want to thank everybody again for coming today. We love to do these sessions for you. Hope that they're helpful. We love to hear your feedback and your thoughts and suggestions as well. So have a great, happy, nice, wonderful, restful weekend. And thanks again for joining us, and be well, be safe.